Do I enjoy a drink now and then? Guilty as charged. Am I one of the best paranormal investigators out there? Well, I like to think so. My first encounter with the supernatural happened on prom night, the same night I had a bit too much to drink for the first time. I found myself in the girls' restroom attempting to compose myself after a rough moment. That's when I heard it. A soft, muffled sob coming from one of the stalls. Wiping my mouth and steadying myself, I glanced around the dimly lit room, my curiosity piqued. At first, I thought it was another student who'd slipped away from the dance. But when my eyes landed on her, I froze. Sitting on the closed lid of a toilet, her head hung low, and her dark hair covered her face. She shook with quiet sobs, her delicate frame illuminated faintly by the room's dim overhead light. "Hi there," I stammered, breaking the heavy silence. "I didn't hear you come in. You startled me." My attempt at a nervous chuckle fell flat. No response. I cautiously stepped closer, trying to get a better look. Something about her seemed out of place. Her outfit was unlike anything I'd seen at prom, simple, almost retro, as if she'd stepped out of a different era. "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked, my voice soft but tinged with concern. Still nothing. Just the sound of her quiet sobbing. Then I noticed her hands. She held them out, palms upward, as though trying to avoid touching her clothes. And that's when I saw it, a deep crimson liquid trailing from her fingertips. My heart skipped a beat. "Oh no, what happened? We need to get you help," I blurted, moving closer, my instincts taking over. I reached out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but my hand passed through her. For a moment I froze in disbelief. I reached out again, and the same thing happened, nothing but empty air. The girl lifted her head slowly, but before I could see her face, she faded away, vanished like a whisper in the wind. The shock sent me stumbling backward onto the cold, tiled floor. It took me hours to process what had just happened. When I got home, I began searching for answers. What I found left me speechless. There had been a student at my school, a girl named Pamela, who had passed away in a tragic incident back in 1986. Seeing her picture confirmed it. I had encountered her spirit that night. That moment changed everything for me. From then on, I made it my mission to uncover more about the unseen and the unknown, delving into the mysteries of the paranormal. I spent months visiting countless so-called haunted places, hoping to replicate that extraordinary experience from prom night. But nothing. No whispers, no figures, not even a flicker of the supernatural. Determined to crack the mystery, I even tried sneaking back into the school restroom, but I was promptly escorted out. Apparently, unannounced visits from alumni aren't welcome. Eventually it hit me. I needed to recreate every detail of that night, and that included the drinks. To my surprise, it worked. From then on, my life took a sharp turn. I started pursuing a career in the paranormal. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that this field is filled with frauds. People who don't believe in ghosts, but happily profit off grieving families. Still, there are genuine souls out there, those who sincerely want to help. This story, though, isn't about them. It's about the most chilling experience of my life. 2 years ago, still relatively new to the job, I received a call from a couple seeking answers about their twin daughters. The girls had gone missing 2 months earlier in what police ruled a kidnapping case. Investigations were ongoing, but the parents were growing desperate. Though they admitted skepticism about the paranormal, their voices carried the unmistakable weight of hope, no matter how slim. I couldn't ignore the anguish in their plea, so I set out immediately. The drive took about 3 hours, and as I approached their house, a strange unease settled over me. The property was grand and picturesque, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a family photo. But something felt off. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the atmosphere thickened with an eerie stillness. I wasn't imagining it. I hadn't even touched the bottle I brought with me yet. The woman who greeted me appeared exhausted, her face lined with sleepless nights and tears. She gave me a wary look, her gaze flickering to the item in my hand. "Good evening. Are you the?" "Yes, I am," I replied quickly, cutting off her question. "Oh, come in then," she said in a shaky voice. She led me to the living room, where her husband sat at a large table, gripping a newspaper he clearly wasn't reading. He stood as I approached, offering a handshake that conveyed both weariness and doubt. I could sense he wasn't entirely convinced of my methods, and honestly, who could blame him? A guy showing up with vodka in hand hardly screams professionalism. I'm deeply sorry for what you're going through, I said sincerely. I can't promise miracles, but I'll do everything I can to help. Could you tell me more about your daughters? The father, Mr. Davis, cleared his throat, his voice faltering as he began. Missy and Lucy. That's what we named them. We wanted their names to sound alike because... He trailed off, unable to continue. His wife stepped in, her voice breaking. They're identical twins. Bright girls, excellent students. Missy's favorite color is green, Lucy's is blue. They just turned 11 not long ago. Her words dissolved into sobs. I just want them back. Mr. Davis leaned over to comfort her before turning back to me. We don't even know if they're still alive, he admitted, his tone heavy with resignation. Maybe calling you was a mistake. The police certainly thought so. But we're out of options. We'll try anything. Just tell us what to do. I hesitated for a moment at Mr. Davis's comment. Why would they mention me to the police? It felt unusual, but I dismissed the thought as overthinking. All right, this might sound a little unconventional, I began, but I work in a unique way. As I mentioned over the phone, I'll need you both to leave the house for a few hours while I'm here. Are you ready to head out? Yes, Mr. Davis replied, his expression conflicted as if he wanted to say more. Before he could, I cut him off with a half smile. And don't worry, I know you've locked away your valuables. I'm not here to take anything. The couple exchanged uneasy glances before Mrs. Davis interjected. Also, the upstairs bathroom is under renovation. Please use the one on this floor if you need to. Got it, I said, placing my bag on the table. Oh, and if you have any orange juice, that'd be great. The Davises left shortly after, their departure feeling strange to me. They mentioned they'd be catching a movie, which struck me as odd given the circumstances. If my kids were missing, I doubted I could sit through 2 hours of anything, let alone a film. Still, I figured they needed a distraction after months of grief and stress. The house was eerily quiet once they were gone. I poured myself a drink, hoping it might help me tune into the energy of the place. It didn't take long before a heavy, oppressive feeling began to settle over me. The air in the living room seemed charged, like it carried the weight of countless unspoken sorrows. But beneath the sadness, I sensed something darker. A simmering anger, sharp and cold. I set my glass down on the floor and stood, scanning the room. My head was clear enough to move without stumbling, but my heightened sensitivity told me something was wrong. Walking slowly, I tried to pinpoint the source of the energy. Then I heard it, a faint, childlike voice, soft yet distinct. Upstairs. I froze, spinning around to face the direction of the sound. There, near the living room door, stood 2 faint, wavering figures. My breath caught in my throat. Their outlines were faint, almost like pencil sketches on a dimly lit canvas. Missy? Lucy? I whispered, struggling to steady my voice. Needle and thread. The words came in unison, their tone fragile yet haunting. My eyes narrowed as I studied them, noticing something strange about the way they stood. They were too close to each other, their forms unnaturally blurred together. Before I could piece it together, they vanished, disappearing like smoke dissolving into the air. Wait, I shouted, the word echoing in the silence. But I already knew where I had to go. Upstairs. Up the stairs. Up the stairs. Up the stairs. My mind echoed the words like a frantic drumbeat as I raced to the second floor. At the top of the staircase, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the twins. They stood motionless, staring down at me with haunting intensity before vanishing again. Lucy? Missy? I called out, my voice trembling as I reached the dimly lit hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, searching for any sign of them. Then I felt it. A chilling sensation, like a cold breath brushing against my ear. I froze, paralyzed by the realization that one of them was close, so close I could feel her presence. The bathroom, a faint whisper said, fragile but unmistakable. The bathroom. My stomach tightened. The words renovations from earlier now felt like a thin veil for something much darker. I darted down the hallway, throwing open doors in a frantic search. My mind raced as I passed the parents' bedroom, its neatly arranged toys silently hinting at happier days. I glimpsed another staircase leading higher, likely to the twins' actual bedrooms, but my focus stayed on the far end of the hallway. where the so-called under-renovation bathroom awaited. Reaching the door, I found it locked, of course. Without hesitation, I slammed my shoulder against it, the old wood groaning under the force. Again and again, I struck until the frame finally splintered, the door swinging open with a crash. At first glance, the bathroom looked ordinary, too ordinary. Pristine tiles, spotless fixtures, nothing out of place. But the air in the room felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding a terrible secret. Then, I saw them. The twins reappeared, standing in the center of the room. Their wide, pleading eyes met mine, but now I could see what had been wrong with them all along. Their bodies, fragile and pale, were fused together at their sides, their tattered clothing stained with ominous dark streaks. "No," I murmured, stepping back as the realization hit me like a cold wave. "No, no, no. Please don't tell me. That's how you—" I couldn't finish the sentence. One of the girls gently lifted her foot and tapped the floor beneath her, drawing my attention to a section of tiles. These tiles looked newer than the others, cleaner, untouched by time. I crouched down, my hands trembling as I reached for the pocket knife in my jacket. Scraping at the grout, I worked with frantic energy, each second feeling like an eternity. The twins watched silently, their sorrowful eyes never leaving me. As my knife dulled, I searched the nearby cabinets and found a screwdriver. With renewed determination, I chipped away at the plaster, the sound of metal against stone echoing in the oppressive silence. Finally, I managed to pry one of the tiles loose. What lay beneath sent a wave of nausea through me. Staring back from the dark hollow was a decomposing skull, its empty eye sockets frozen in eternal silence. The air filled with a putrid stench that made my stomach churn, but I couldn't look away. I glanced back at the twins, now seated on the floor. The girl on the left reached out a delicate hand toward the remains. "That's me," she whispered, her voice tinged with an unbearable sadness. Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to process what I'd uncovered. My voice shook as I asked, Who did this to you?" I already knew the answer, but hearing it from them would make it undeniable. "Daddy does bad things," the girl on the right said softly. "But Mommy's worse," the one on the left added. I swallowed hard, nodding slightly as I pulled out my phone. Dialing 911, I steadied my voice and said, "I've found the two missing girls." After ending the call, I turned back to the twins. "Help is on the way. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Do you want to tell me what happened?" The twins exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful, yet distant. Finally, the one on the right spoke. "Mommy didn't give us anything to eat. We were hungry. We tried to run away, but they caught us," the left one added. "Mommy was so angry, she said we'd never leave again." "Needle and thread," they said in unison, their voices soft yet haunting. For the next few minutes, we sat in silence. They gazed at me with eyes that no longer looked sad, but strangely peaceful. The quiet was interrupted by loud knocking at the front door. "That must be them," I said, standing up. "Will you girls be okay?" I barely got the words out before their forms began flickering, dissolving into the air like morning mist under the sun. Before I could say anything more, they were gone. Quickly wiping my tears, I rushed downstairs to meet the police. It took hours to explain everything to the officers, though the official statement ended up being sanitized into something like, "The investigator accidentally discovered the bodies." I didn't bother correcting them. The Davis parents were arrested on the spot, and their confessions were just as harrowing as the scene I'd uncovered. Mrs. Davis, suffering from severe mental health issues, often lashed out in uncontrollable anger. Mr. Davis, instead of intervening, used their daughters as an outlet for his frustrations. After starving the twins for 2 days, the girls had attempted to escape, but they didn't make it far. Needle and thread. Those words have haunted me ever since. It was the cruel method of their demise. The Davis parents, in their twisted logic, had sewn their daughters together, ensuring they'd never run away again. How long the girls survived like that is something I'll never know. But it couldn't have been long. After their deaths, the parents buried their bodies beneath the bathroom tiles, hoping the fresh renovations would hide their crime. They played the role of grieving parents perfectly, going so far as to hire me, a paranormal investigator they assumed would be too eccentric to find anything. They'd clearly picked me for my unconventional reputation, no doubt expecting me to leave empty-handed. Well, not everyone believes in ghosts. Looking back, you might have expected the creepiest story I'd ever tell to involve demons or malevolent spirits. Sorry to disappoint. The most horrifying thing I ever encountered wasn't supernatural at all. It was two living, breathing humans, capable of unimaginable cruelty. As for the twins, I like to believe they're at peace now. I hope they found the freedom they were denied in life. I first heard this story when I was in college. I'd come home for winter break, and it was just me and my dad in the house. I was watching a ghost hunter show on TV. Just for fun, something to laugh at. I've never really believed in that stuff. The TV programs always felt fake to me, and it's hard to shake off my skepticism and get fully into it. I figured my dad felt the same way. He wasn't the type to get caught up in supernatural nonsense. He'd scoff at things like that. But then, during a commercial break, I casually got up and went to the kitchen where he was. Out of nowhere, I asked, "Hey Dad, do you believe in ghosts?" His reply was so nonchalant, it completely threw me off. "Yup." I stared at him surprised. "Really?" I asked, genuinely shocked. "That doesn't really seem like you." He shrugged, taking a moment before responding. "Yeah," he said finally, "but I know ghosts are real. I've met one." My curiosity was piqued. I had to hear more. My dad was a storyteller, and I could repeat most of his tales word for word since he would tell them so often. But this was different. This wasn't a story I'd ever heard before. It was something that had apparently changed his life. To this day, I'm still unsure if I fully believe it, but when someone so logical, so grounded, tells you something like that, it makes you question what you believe and why. He never talks about it, but whenever I bring it up, he swears on his life that it's 100% true. No exaggeration. So here's the story, told from his perspective. It was back in the old house in Tacoma, the one where you grew up until you were about 4. Your grandparents still lived there, but I was in college at the time, so I was visiting for the weekend. I went to Tacoma Community College, so I was close by and came home pretty often to get a good meal. I remember sitting down for dinner with my parents, just the 3 of us, in the early evening. The sun hadn't completely set yet, and we were chatting like usual when the phone rang in the kitchen. My mom got up to answer it, leaving me alone with Dad. A little while later, she called him into the kitchen. "Leo, can you come here for a minute?" There was something in her voice. She sounded worried, like she was shaking a bit. My dad wiped his face, stood up, and followed her into the kitchen. They weren't in there long, but it felt strange. They were talking quietly, and the tension in the room was noticeable. After a few minutes, they came back into the dining room. Now, they both had their coats on. "Something's come up," my mom said, her voice tight. "We need to step out for a bit. There's dessert in the fridge. Help yourself. Don't worry about the dishes. I'll take care of them when we get back." My dad didn't say anything, but from the look on his face, I could tell whatever was going on was serious. My mom seemed genuinely worried. They left in a hurry, and I was left alone to finish my dinner. I cleared the table, ignoring my mom's request to leave the dishes, and washed my plate. Afterward, I went to the living room and sat down on the couch, opening one of my school books to relax. Time passed, and my parents still hadn't come home. It was almost 11 p.m., and I was getting ready for bed when something strange happened. As I walked up the stairs toward the bathroom, I heard it, a faint, slow, whining noise. I stopped and listened. The sound was coming from the ceiling, a soft creak, rhythmic and drawn out. It wasn't an unfamiliar noise, but the pattern of it was unsettling. Curiosity got the best of me. I pulled down the attic stairs and climbed up. Now, I wasn't scared. I didn't feel uneasy. Actually, I felt almost comfortable. The attic was dark and eerie, but there was something strangely welcoming about the space. As I scanned the room, it quickly became clear where the sound was coming from. Among the boxes and random items was an old rocking chair, one that had belonged to my grandmother. She had been living in a nearby nursing home and couldn't bring much with her. The rocking chair was gently moving back and forth, creaking with each motion. Next to it, an old birdcage swayed slowly, its door gently creaking open and shut. I assumed there must be a draft causing it and decided to look for the source. I searched the corners of the room, but there was no breeze, no open windows, and no ventilation. It was a calm night outside, not a gust of wind in the air. The chair and the birdcage were heavy, yet they moved as if something was pushing them. But the rest of the room, including paper stacks and other objects, remained perfectly still. I gave up on finding the draft and looked back at the chair. It was still rocking gently. I approached it, resting my hand on the armrest. The chair stopped. Still no draft. I lifted my hand, and the chair stayed still. But as I turned away, I heard the creaking again. I glanced back. The chair was moving again. It was strange, but I wasn't really creeped out. I shrugged it off and walked to the birdcage. The door was still swaying open and shut. It used to house a parrot, but it had been empty for some time. I latched the door, thinking at least one of the sounds would stop. I made my way to the attic stairs, but halfway down, I heard the metallic creak again. I looked back, and sure enough, the birdcage door was swinging open again, unlatched. The chair was still rocking. I was sure I had latched it properly. Under any other circumstances, I would have been terrified, but for some reason, I wasn't. It was just a rocking chair and a birdcage. Nothing to fear, right? I went downstairs, escaping the eerie sounds, and resumed my reading. The creaking continued, but I ignored it, unable to sleep because of it. Around midnight, I heard my parents pull into the driveway. They came inside and found me still reading. My mom was crying. They sat down with me and explained that they had been at the hospital, where my grandmother had just passed away. That's the story as my dad tells it. He believes to this day that before she left this world, his grandmother came home to pay him one last visit. I've always enjoyed a good ghost story. When I was younger, there were these books called Haunted Philippines and True Philippine Ghost Stories. Collections of eerie tales and paranormal experiences from people all across the country. Some were in English, while others were in Tagalog. They were quick to read and had multiple volumes, each with a few ghost pictures toward the end. You know the type, mundane family, or landscape photos with a blurry figure circled in red. Some of those images were genuinely unsettling and looked disturbingly real. I loved those books, even though I should have savored them while they lasted. Sadly, they seem to have been discontinued as of last year and are hard to find in bookstores now. To me, those books were pure entertainment. Growing up in the Philippines, ghost stories and mythical legends were always a part of life. Everyone seemed to have a story, or at least knew someone who did. A handful of relatives in my family claimed to have had encounters with ghosts, or multos, as we call them in our native language. I never expected I'd have my own stories to share. Until recently, that is. My family and I had taken a long overdue trip back to the Philippines. I hadn't seen my relatives or my homeland in years, so it was strange to see all my younger cousins grown up. It was great reconnecting with them, reminiscing, and spending time together. One evening, after a long day of shopping, we were heading back to my aunt's house when the conversation in the car shifted to supernatural topics. In Filipino culture, religion and tradition are deeply ingrained, and we have a healthy dose of superstition to go along with it. There's no shortage of mythical monsters in our folklore, and hearing about them from my parents and relatives only fed my fascination. They told me about the tikbalan, a creature that roams the forests of the mountains. It's described as a towering humanoid with the head and limbs of a horse. Basically, imagine BoJack Horseman, but terrifying. Then there's the Capri, which is a tale more for children. It's said to be a giant, troll-like figure that lives in the large trees of the forest. You'll often hear about it smoking a cigar, waiting to scare off children who wander too far at night. Though it's generally considered non-violent, it's still a spooky figure for kids. Another terrifying creature is the tiyanak. These are the stuff of nightmares. In the remote areas near forests, you can hear the faint sound of a baby crying. If you're foolish enough to follow the sound deep into the woods, you might find yourself hopelessly lost. Or worse, you might find the source. If you're unlucky, you'll stumble upon what looks like a helpless baby lying on the ground. But be warned, it's no baby. It's a malevolent, shape-shifting creature that will devour you if you get too close. Then there's the aswang, a shape-shifting creature that feeds on human flesh at night. A particularly terrifying version of it, called the manananggal, which literally means remover, has an even darker twist. By day, it appears as an ordinary woman, but by night, it transforms into something monstrous. The creature roots its legs into the ground, and its top half detaches, sprouting bat-like wings as it takes flight. Its main targets are pregnant women, and it has a long, vine-like tongue that slithers through windows to consume the fetus. Creepy, right? I've always treated these stories with a mix of skepticism and fear. They were fascinating, but I never wanted to encounter any of them firsthand. Even after moving to America, I still couldn't shake the unease I felt about these creatures from back home. During the drive, my cousins shared their own strange sightings and eerie experiences, each one with varying degrees of believability. My dad joined in, recounting his own tales from his youth, dramatic as always. It was all in good fun, but my mom remained quiet. She was the hardcore skeptic, always dismissing such stories as nonsense. However, this time, she seemed like she had something to say. My curiosity got the better of me, and I asked her if she had ever experienced anything supernatural. She nodded and began her story. Back when she was in college, studying to be a nurse, she lived in a very old dormitory not far from the city where I was born. The conditions were tough. 4 students cramped into a room that was half the size of a typical American college dorm. On top of that, the campus used to be an infirmary during World War II, and hundreds of soldiers from both sides passed through and died within its walls. Residents of the dorm often spoke of strange noises at night, footsteps, faint echoes, and mysterious knocks from certain parts of the building. There were rumors that the place had once served as a temporary orphanage and that some children had died there. If you listened closely, they said, you could hear the laughter of children echoing from the walls. On more than one occasion, my mom and her roommates would wake to soft shuffling sounds in their room, as if someone small was moving around. But when they looked, there was never anyone there, so they'd dismiss it and fall back to sleep. It wasn't until the next morning that they noticed the strange footprints on the walls and ceiling, small ones like those of a child. One of my mom's roommates moved out after that. Then, there was the night when one of my mom's close friends, after a late study session, was heading back to her room. She was a bit superstitious, so she kept her head down and hurried through the dark halls. As she passed by one of the old, unused rooms, a large space that had once served as a triage area during the hospital days, something caught her eye. Inside, she saw several men lying on the old, rusted beds. They looked injured, bandaged, and dressed in what appeared to be World War II-era American soldier uniforms. She froze in place, feeling an intense chill creep through her body. One of the soldiers sat up slowly and turned to look at her. That was enough to snap her out of her trance, and she ran straight back to her dorm. When she told her friends what happened, the bravest of the group decided to check out the room. But when they arrived, all the beds were empty. My mom was always the skeptic. She never paid much attention to those ghost stories, until one early morning, when she had an experience that still troubles her to this day. Before classes, my mom would always wake up extra early to get first dibs on the showers in the shared dorm bathrooms. It wasn't too hard, since most of the other residents were too afraid to leave their rooms that early, convinced the place was haunted. My mom just brushed off those stories, and she always made it to class on time. That morning, she went through her usual routine without any problems. As she was walking back to her room, though, she heard something. Whispers. She stopped and turned around. Down the hallway, at the edge of the dim light, she saw a figure standing in the shadows. The lights in that wing were old and flickering, so it was hard to see clearly. But my mom could make out enough to realize the figure was dressed like a nun. This didn't make sense. There were no nuns on campus, and the nearest church was miles away. Staying calm, my mom turned around and kept walking, quickening her pace. Her footsteps echoed through the empty hall. She listened closely but heard nothing else. When she turned into another hallway, she glanced behind her. The nun was there, closer this time, definitely following her. As she neared her dorm, my mom turned around once more. The nun was at the end of the hall, standing just where she'd first seen her. The figure remained still, as if it had been there the whole time. My mom hurried to her door, fumbling with the key. One last look. When she turned to the left, the nun was gone. Relieved, she locked the door and started picking up her things. But then an unnaturally cold chill swept over her. Slowly, she turned to her right. There the nun was again, but now much closer and fully in the light. Without thinking, my mom yanked open the door. That's when the child ran out. A small child about the age of a kindergartner dashed past her, laughing as if playing a game. The child ran straight toward the nun. My mom stood frozen, watching as the child passed right through the nun and disappeared into another room. After a brief pause, the nun turned and followed the child. My mom asked around after that experience and found out that the last time there had been children or nuns on campus was when it had been a temporary orphanage years before. It had been shut down after a tragic fire that killed 12 children and several nuns. She never experienced anything like that again. When she told us the story, we all sat there, stunned. My mom had been keeping this from me all along. I was fascinated, but also terrified by what I'd just heard. At the time, I had a passive interest in the paranormal. It wasn't anything serious. Certainly not an obsession. I wasn't trying to prove the afterlife existed or desperately seeking answers about ghosts or spirits. Did I believe in the supernatural? Not really. But I was open to the possibility. My interest was just for fun, like someone who enjoys horror movies or knitting sweaters. In fact, while I enjoyed reading up on urban legends and loved hearing ghost stories, I was also terrified by them. My imagination, fueled by all the spooky books and movies I consumed, would always get the best of me when I was alone in the dark. It was an interesting paradox, kind of like how, as a kid, I was fascinated by snakes, but terrified at the thought of encountering one in the wild. To be honest, I was a little jealous of my mom for having such a cool ghost story to tell. I wished in that moment that I had one of my own. Well, as they say, be careful what you wish for. Later in the trip, we visited my uncle, who lived in a town a few hours away. He ran a successful farming business with his family. On the way to his house, we passed a long bridge that stretched over a steep ravine with a river far below. As we crossed the bridge, I couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. It made sense, of course. I'd driven over that bridge countless times on previous visits to my uncle. But this time, it was different. Beneath the familiarity, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible had happened there. And it somehow involved me, a distant memory clawing at the back of my mind, screaming to be remembered. Almost as if on cue, my dad spoke up. This bridge is infamous around here because of the White Lady. Now, the White Lady is a well-known ghost story in the Philippines, much like the Kapre or the Tikbalang. It's one of the most widely spread ghost stories across cultures. In America, she's called the Lady in White. In Spanish culture, she's La Llorona. The core of the story is the same. A ghostly woman in a long white dress and dark hair who appears on lonely roads, waiting for a ride. In the Philippines, if you stop to offer her a lift, she'll quietly get into your back seat. She won't bother you unless you talk to her. After a while, she'll disappear from your car. But if you don't stop and keep driving, she'll suddenly appear inside your car and attack you. The moral? It's better to give her a ride. When we arrived at my uncle's house, I still couldn't shake the strange feeling about the bridge. After a great dinner and some video games with my cousins, I found my uncle out on the balcony, having a drink. He offered me a beer since I was finally old enough, and I took a seat next to him. "Hey Tito, do you remember anything about that bridge just outside of town?" He set his drink down and looked at me for a moment, as if weighing whether to answer. Then he spoke. "You were really young when it happened. I guess you don't remember much." Now I was fully intrigued. I had to know more. What exactly happened? His smile faded, and he began telling me the story. As he spoke, the memories came flooding back. Memories I had long repressed as a defense mechanism. Every detail returned in crystal clear clarity, as if it had just happened. By the time my uncle finished the tale, there was no denying it. I had encountered a ghost all those years ago. It was the mid-90s, and I was still living in the Philippines. As a curious 6-year-old, always seeking adventure, I spent a lot of time exploring. Once or twice a week, I'd stay the night at my uncle's farm, which was just starting to take off as a business. The town was small and isolated back then, and I loved it because there were so many places to explore. though I only did so during the daytime. One particular night, I was at my uncle's place, just watching TV. My uncle got a call about a delivery of chicken feed that needed to be picked up from the next town. At that time, he only had a few farmhands, and they all had the night off. Normally, he wouldn't make such a run this late, but he was behind schedule and had no choice if he wanted to keep the farm running. As he got ready to leave, he asked me if I wanted to come along. I immediately agreed, always restless and eager for adventure. My uncle had an old Toyota SUV he used for deliveries. I climbed into the second row, my usual spot, as my uncle settled into the driver's seat. The drive was uneventful. It was nearly 11 p.m. and there were hardly any other cars on the road. As we crossed the bridge the first time, nothing seemed out of place. The bridge was new, built just the year before after the old one had been destroyed in a typhoon. The city had even installed streetlights on it, which was a big deal, since most of the other roads around there didn't have any lighting. We arrived at the next town, and I helped my uncle load the supplies, well, as much as a 6-year-old could. But it was on the way back when things started to get strange. I was sitting in the back seat, staring out the window absent-mindedly, when I felt the car slow down. We were nearing the bridge again, and something felt off. I couldn't see over the seat to the front of the car, but I could tell the lights on the bridge were off. At this point, the car was barely crawling. "Hey, sport, why don't you lie down and take a little nap?" My uncle's voice came from the front, but it didn't sound right. It was strained, like he was trying to hide his fear. "No, that's okay. I'm not tired," I said, confused. "Please, just do it for me, okay?" His voice was firm, but there was something in it that made me obey. My uncle was usually laid back, so when he sounded serious, I knew something was wrong. "Okay," I said, lying down sideways in the seat. I caught a glimpse of my uncle's eyes in the rearview mirror, and they were filled with unmistakable fear. Then I felt the familiar bump of the car going over the bridge, and suddenly the car came to a complete stop. "Close your eyes, okay? No matter what, keep them closed," my uncle instructed, his voice even more urgent now. I nodded, though a growing fear took over. I didn't understand what was happening or why I had to close my eyes. But obeying him, I squeezed my eyes shut. Then, the strangest thing happened. My uncle started to sing. It was a Filipino folk song, one I had only heard once before. About a year ago, my aunt and uncle had gotten into a huge fight. Things were thrown, and it was one of those moments that seemed to shake the house. My cousins and I had huddled in their room, terrified, as we waited for the shouting to stop. An hour later, my uncle came in, apologized for the fight, and started singing that song to calm us down. The melody was beautiful, and I had no idea my uncle could sing that well. He never sang it again. That was when everything changed. The song my uncle was singing still sounded beautiful, but I could hear the tremble in his voice. His car wasn't large, but I was small, and there was enough space in the second row. I lay down on the seat, perpendicular to the windows, hoping sleep would come. But instead, something else arrived. Click, click. I heard the familiar sound of the headlights flashing, and suddenly I felt it. The unmistakable presence of someone else in the car. I couldn't see them, but my sense of space told me that someone or something had joined us in the second row. I squeezed my eyes shut even tighter as my uncle continued driving, his voice still steady but clearly strained. The temperature inside the car dropped sharply. I curled up tightly, instinctively seeking warmth, trying to escape whatever was now sitting beside me. I didn't understand much about ghosts or supernatural beings at that age, but everything about this presence felt wrong, as if something not of this world had entered the car with us. My uncle finished the song and started it over again. I marveled at his composure, but I couldn't bring myself to open my eyes. Then I heard her, so close to me. At first, it was just clicking, like something small snapping. But as it grew louder, the sound morphed into something more disturbing, like stalks of celery being twisted and broken. Crack, 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 crack. It was unnerving, the sound coming from all around me. We crossed over the bridge, but the presence was still there. My fear grew so intense that I could barely move. When the car hit a bump, I slid to the side, closer to her. I felt something damp against my leg. My breathing became shallow, and I started crying quietly, unable to stop the tears. Something inside me compelled me to open my eyes, just for a split second. In that moment, I saw her. A flash of white, with stringy, damp hair darker than night. She was turned away from me. I blinked away the tears, and when I opened my eyes again, her hair was right in front of my face. I squeezed my eyes shut again, desperate to block out what I had seen. It felt like an eternity before we finally reached a familiar curve in the road, signaling that we were entering the town. The presence, though, was still there. By this point, my uncle had gone silent. No more songs, just the sound of the car's tires against the road. The air had grown even colder, and I trembled, not from the chill, but from the terror that gripped me. Then she spoke. A low, hushed whisper, softer than any whisper I'd ever heard. I couldn't understand the words. They didn't sound threatening, but they were filled with such sadness. And then, just like that, she was gone. The air shifted instantly. The coldness lifted, replaced by the usual humid warmth of the evening. I could feel it. The presence had vanished. I heard my uncle breathe a sigh of relief. I didn't open my eyes until we had reached the safety of the farm. My uncle had to carry me back inside and straight into my bed, and only then did I open my eyes. From what I could recall, we never spoke of that night to anyone, not even each other, ever again. Subsequent trips across the bridge at night never resulted in another white lady sighting. At least not for me. I'd find out later that in the early 80s, a woman was found dead at the bottom of that bridge. People said that she was traveling to the next town and was hoping to catch a ride with any passing vehicles. It was late at night, and she had no family nearby that could give her a ride. No one knows what really happened, but many suspected that it was murder. After my trip back to the Philippines, I couldn't stop thinking about that night at the bridge. How could I forget such an incredible and terrifying experience? I guess it doesn't matter since I remember it now. But there was something else I realized about that night, something I hadn't remembered before. When I heard her whisper, I thought I only heard unintelligible garble. But that's not true. She did say something. She said, "Maraming salamat." Translated to English, that means thank you very much. I've been blind since birth. As I grew up, everything around me was described in such vivid detail that I never understood why seeing was so important. I had no point of comparison, no way to grasp its significance. We lived in a single-story ranch house, or so my father told me. In my mind, I could see, though not in the way a sighted person could. I had spatial awareness. I knew where my bedroom was, the bathroom, the living room, and the kitchen. Each wall had its own texture. I don't know if that was intentional, or if I simply noticed things that others overlooked. I rarely stumbled. It only happened when my father or visitors placed things where they didn't belong. It was usually the visitors, and Dad would yell at them. Visitors didn't come often, and when they did, it was never for long. My father told me not to speak to them. It unsettled him, he said. He worried when I saw something he didn't, something I saw with my ears or by touch. Ellie was the first to make an impression. She was kind, or so I thought. She asked me my name and why my face was so messed up. I could hear where she sat. Her breaths were harsh and nasal, like she had a cold. When my father had one, he'd breathe through his mouth, loud, labored breaths, unaccustomed to it. When people mentioned my face, I would touch it, trying to figure out why it was so strange to them. When I asked if I could touch their faces, there was always a pause. I guessed sighted people didn't do that. Why would they? When I asked Ellie if I could touch her face, she reluctantly agreed. But just moments later, my father entered the room and asked who I was talking to. I told him nobody. He always punished me when I spoke of them. I think it terrified him. He would take my arm and march me off, my feet stumbling as I struggled to keep up. When he finally set me down, I'd frantically search my surroundings until I knew where I was. It was usually my bedroom. Sometimes he'd leave me outside in the middle of nowhere. That was the worst. I'd be lost and frightened. He told me about the road in front of the house, the sound of cars. If one touched me, it would kill me. Those sounds were all I had to orient myself. I waited, listening for the cars, then I knew which way to run back to the house. That evening, I heard Ellie again. She whispered, saying she was scared. I whispered back, but she didn't hear me. I asked my father about Ellie. He didn't want to talk about her. I asked him why. He didn't answer. When I told him she asked about my face, he asked what I did. I told him I wanted to touch hers. He laughed, but I knew it wasn't genuine. I could hear it. When someone laughs out of joy, their mouth is wide open. When it's forced, the mouth is almost closed. To me, the difference was obvious. It wasn't until I was older that he explained it all to me. He told me we lived in a special place, connected to the other world. He said that sometimes the dead slipped through. People who died in pain and who wanted to reach the living. Because I couldn't see, I could tune into them. They knew I could listen when others couldn't. He told me I had to ignore them or they'd attach to me and never leave. He said all the dead wanted was to be alive again, and it was dangerous. They would trick me. He knew how to deal with them, but he couldn't help me if they attached to me. A few years later, Alex appeared to me. She said she was lost and didn't know where she was. I told her I wasn't allowed to speak to her, but she begged for help. I stayed silent, knowing what would happen if I spoke. "Did you speak to them?" my father asked. I was upset, but I told him no. I wished I could have helped her. I knew what it was like to be lost, and that scared me. After Alex, I knew what I had to do. So I did it. They stopped bothering me for a long time. That is, until Sarah appeared. Sarah didn't give me a chance to remain silent. I was alone in the living room listening to the TV when I heard her voice. "Help," she whispered. "I need to find a way out." I stayed silent. "You can hear me, can't you?" she asked, surprised. "I'm not allowed to speak to you," I told her. "Please," she begged. "I'm scared. I'm lost. I want to see my daddy." I gripped the arms of the chair, my heart racing. "I'm not allowed," I repeated. "He's dead," she said softly. I didn't respond. "Your father is dead," she repeated. Still, I stayed silent. I wasn't going to fall for it. Suddenly, I heard banging and the sound of objects flying around. The shelves started to shake. "Stop it," I screamed. The noise stopped. "Please help me leave," she begged. But I refused to speak to her. I did the only thing I could think of. I unlocked the front door, hoping she would run out, get lost, just like I would. When I heard nothing more from her, I locked the door again and sat back down. The TV was the only sound. The rest was silent. My heart raced. It felt like the ticking of a clock within my chest, building up to something I couldn't control. That's when I heard my father's voice. I screamed. "Son," he said, "I need your help. I think I'm dying." I did what I always did. I didn't speak. If he died, he'd never leave me. Instead, I ran outside and shouted for help. I screamed until my throat was raw. I heard cars speeding down the road in front of the house. I shouted until I heard someone respond. A woman's voice. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I think my father's dying," I said, desperate. "What happened to your face?" she asked. I begged her to help, and she promised she would. Sometime later, the woman came back to me. I was sitting on the grass when she asked if she could hold my hand. "I'm so sorry," she said. I heard sirens and the rush of people. I asked her what was happening. "I'm here for you," the woman replied. As the noise quieted down, a man's voice spoke. "I'm a paramedic," he said. "What happened to your face?" "I'm fine," I told him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice kind. "I'm fine," I repeated. He asked if he could touch my face. I agreed. Then I screamed as I felt his fingers on my skin. He told me everything would be okay, and the woman squeezed my hand, encouraging me to be brave. I felt a pressure on my forehead, and the air felt cold against my skin. It sounded like someone peeling an orange. I pictured it in my mind and was terrified he'd expose my insides. I didn't know what was happening. My head felt tight, like when you kick your shin on something hard. Then something bright, sharp, and painful pierced my senses. It hurt so much I couldn't help but cry. "What happened to your eyes?" the paramedic asked, his voice urgent. "I'm blind," I replied. He asked if he could check them. The pain returned as he examined them. "Do you know him?" he asked, referring to the woman. She told him I'd been screaming for help and that she didn't know me. "How long have you had the eye injury?" he asked. "I've been blind since birth," I said, my voice trembling. He asked if I could see his fingers. I told him no. "Can you open your eyes?" he asked. I didn't understand what he meant. He asked if he could open them. I didn't respond, but I felt his fingers on my face, coated in something rubbery. Then, the brightness returned. I screamed again. He tried to calm me. The woman squeezed my hand again. I didn't know what was happening. Things I couldn't explain were flooding my senses. It was like everything had always been, but magnified 100 times, so much more vivid, more real. I couldn't stop screaming as a blurry shape began to take form in front of me. "Just breathe, okay? Everything will be fine," the paramedic said, trying to steady me. "When was the last time you saw?" As my heart began to slow and my breathing calmed, I was still overwhelmed by what I was feeling. It was too much to process. I wanted to cry. And I did. "How long has it been?" he asked again. "I've never seen anything before," I told him. "They told me to keep the eye mask on most of the day, only removing it at night to help my eyes adjust." I had been staying with my uncle and aunt, people I hadn't known existed. They were shocked by what happened to me and that I hadn't been to school. "It's been a roller coaster ride. The doctors said I might never have perfect vision, but the little sight I have feels like a gift. I've been learning to read and write over the past few years. Apologies if my English isn't great, it's the best I can do. I've asked my aunt about my father, but all she says is that he died of a heart attack. I asked her what kind of man he was. She says he was her brother, and she'll love him no matter what. My uncle refuses to speak about him at all. I've been spending a lot of time on the computer lately and enjoying the internet. I can't believe something like this exists. After so many years of loneliness, I can now talk to anyone, whenever I want. But I'm wary. How do I know if the person I'm talking to is alive? No one seems to worry about that, like my father did. Today, someone asked me who I was. I was on a forum discussing the spirit world. I was so glad to find people I could relate to. They sent me a link asking if I was the same person. It led to an article on a true crime website about my dad. They mentioned me by name. It said I was bound, so I couldn't see, that my mother had gone missing shortly after I was born, and that my father always wanted a daughter. They found 14 bodies in the basement. One girl had escaped, Sarah Frank. She was the one who called the police. They said my father parked the car at the back of the house, where they found it. He carried the bodies into the basement through the storm entrance and left them there. Sarah had managed to escape after agreeing to be his daughter, after 4 days of torture. She eventually stabbed him with a kitchen knife he'd left on the counter while he made toast. I didn't want to believe it, and I'm not sure I would have if it weren't for the names of the victims. 2 names stood out, Ellie Farmer and Alex Riddle, but I had spoken to them in the living room. To this day, I wonder if my father was ever honest with me about one thing in his life. Did I speak to them before or after he killed them? Staff Sergeant Gary Lamb hanged himself from the 4th floor window of St. Ogilvy General on April 15, 2011. It took EMTs 6 minutes to break through the door he had jammed shut and cut him down. By then, he had torn off 6 of his 8 fingernails, digging bloody furrows into his neck, and his face had swollen to the tender consistency of an overripe grape. His tongue, thrust out and nearly severed by his jaw's involuntary clenching, and the stains slicking the bottom of his hospital gown, were enough to make anyone cringe. You didn't need a medical license to know it was time to unroll the body bag. 6 minutes is eternity to a man suffocating. But in that time, the growing crowd in the parking lot was treated to a second horrifying spectacle. As Gary Lamb swayed in the wind, a woman, perhaps a nurse, tried and failed to pull him back into the room. Naturally, the only thing she grabbed was the rope itself, which only jerked him around like some kind of macabre puppet. To truly understand Southeast Asian horror, if you're not from there, you need to see our countries in a different light. The typical view is often displayed on vlogs and Instagram feeds. Pristine beaches, charming street vendors, perfect weather, shared by college graduates on gap years searching for themselves. That wasn't my experience. For those of us who grew up there, the memories don't include carefree days at the beach or wild nights out with hostile friends. We remember the heat, oppressive, unrelenting, and the suffocating humidity that stings your eyes and numbs your thoughts. We also remember old warnings of horrors that follow you home from a poorly worded comment, things that don't appear on your doorstep but on your ceiling, things that grab your hand as you reach for a light switch, or your ankles when you swim alone. As the rainforests made way for gleaming skyscrapers, these things weren't bothered in the slightest by modernity. Maybe that's why I can only write about this from an apartment in Los Angeles, continents away. The majority of my stories come from my time in the military. While I've never personally encountered anything supernatural during my service, crawling through the muck of the country's oldest rainforests meant I met no shortage of fellow servicemen scarred by paranormal experiences. One person who frequently shared his stories with me was a technical first sergeant attached to our unit. I can't recall his name, but we spent many nights on guard duty at Tower Number 3, overlooking a desolate moonlit airfield. He'd lean on the guardrail, puffing away at a cigarette, the acrid smoke swirling around me as I tried, and failed, to avoid it. That was when he told me his first story. You know Gary didn't kill himself, right? Gary was a smaller guy, maybe 130 pounds soaking wet, and that was a big part of his chronic insecurity. Maybe it was why he was also 130 pounds of grade A jerk. The 38-year-old staff sergeant had a permanent scowl on his face as he stalked around the base, and he had a talent for creating busywork for the newly inducted soldiers. It wasn't surprising that his personal life mirrored this tough exterior. Elena had always been Gary's high school sweetheart, the kind of girl who knew she could do better, but never quite found the courage to be single. She listened, sometimes wistfully, sometimes resentfully, as her friends shared stories of whirlwind romances, passionate affairs, and extravagant gestures from a steady stream of suitors. Then, one by one, they settled down, finding the perfect man in the chaos of single life, their lives transitioning into an endless paradise, a paradise Elena had come to realize she would never have. Of course, very little of this was true. Her friends, like anyone else, had their own struggles and flaws. But Elena's life was overshadowed by the debilitating depression that made everything else appear brighter. What made it worse, though, was Gary's apathy. From her perspective, once they became official, he stopped trying. There were no romantic gestures, no poems, no surprise gifts. Just a dull, monotonous existence in their two-bedroom apartment. A blur of waking up, going to work, coming home, and going to bed, each day blending into the next. Maybe that was why, with so little in her life, she clung to the scraps of her relationship with a vice-like grip. In the final year, her obsession with Gary's potential infidelity took hold. She bombarded him with texts, snuck onto base to check where he was, and kept an eye on him obsessively, her resentment growing into something dangerously close to obsession. And she was right. One night, Elena came home to find Gary in bed with a woman half his age, caught in a passionate embrace that she had never experienced with him. The meltdown that followed was nothing short of historic. The next day, she arrived at the base, a whirlwind of fury, clutching the iron gates, screaming in a fit of rage. The poor MP on duty struggled to pry her off the gates, her knees bloodied from her frantic resistance. She swore revenge as she stormed off, leaving Gary cowering in his office. That same day, dressed in all red, Elena threw herself from their 8th-floor apartment. In a cruel twist of fate, she timed it so that her fall would coincide with Gary's return from work. Fortunately, by the time he arrived, the scene was already swarmed with sirens and police tape, and her broken body was covered with a tarp. However, the detail of her red clothing did not escape Gary. Elena was Chinese, and in her culture, the color red held deep significance. It symbolized joy, vitality, and energy, and was often associated with life. But when it came to death, the color was white, symbolizing peace, resolution, and finality. For Elena to end her life in red was a direct defiance of this sacred tradition, signaling that her death was not a true ending. She hadn't intended to leave the world, and she certainly hadn't meant to go alone. This realization struck Gary with terrifying force. He was already racked with guilt, and now he feared the wrath of Elena's spirit. So, on the same day, he sought the help of a Taoist priest. These priests were known for their expertise in dealing with restless spirits, and their advice was considered vital by those who sought protection. The priest didn't pass judgment, but he understood the gravity of the situation. The spirit, he explained, would roam the earth for 41 days, if she returned at all. If Gary could survive this period without succumbing to her, the curse would lift, and his life would return to normal. But the question remained, how would he know she was coming? You'll hear her jumping. Jumping? The idea of a dead woman hopping around the apartment was both absurd and horrifying. She won't be able to bend over, so hide under something. A bed, for example. She can only look for you for so long before she has to move on. The priest's advice was unnerving, but Gary saw no reason to question it further. He left the temple with doubt festering in his mind. For the next 41 days, Gary lived in a haze of fear, grief, and paranoia. He jumped at every noise, his wide eyes darting around in sweaty panic. He avoided his apartment as much as possible, preferring the company of co-workers on base to the oppressive silence waiting at home. But he couldn't avoid it forever. No amount of cleaning could erase the marks left behind. The stain in the parking lot, baked into the asphalt by the relentless summer heat, greeted him every time he came home. Gary avoided looking at it, but his eyes always caught the faint traces left on the walls, the ones the cleaners had missed. He overheard an EMT once. "This one's nasty. I've never seen a fall this bad." One night, while working on a report at home, he heard a terrible crash from the living room. The sound was heavy, shaking the floor beneath him. He froze, every nerve on edge. Was something falling? It was too loud to be footsteps. Slowly, his fear-stricken mind pieced the clues together. "You'll hear her jumping." Gary's hands trembled as he crawled under the bed. The space was small, barely enough to squeeze in. Flat on his back, he couldn't move except to turn his head left or right. The bedroom door slammed open. He clenched his fists, holding his breath as tears streamed down his face. The sound landed right beside him. Up close it was worse. Flesh tearing, bone splintering. Then, silence. Nobody knows how long Gary stayed there, frozen under the bed, barely daring to breathe. His pulse slowed, and a dangerous hope crept in. Was it over? Had she moved on? Terrified but unable to resist, he turned his head. When the mind perceives something it cannot comprehend, time seems to slow. Every detail becomes painfully clear. What Gary saw defied explanation. The priest had been right. She couldn't bend. Her broken, twisted body stared at him with cloudy, lifeless eyes. But she hadn't been jumping. She had landed on her head. When Gary failed to report the next morning, the first sergeant came for a wellness check. He found Gary cowering under the bed, clutching him in terror and incoherently recounting his experience between gut-wrenching sobs. The horror of what Gary saw left him hospitalized for months. In that time, he tried to take his life 3 times. The 4th attempt, as you already know, was successful. "Wait," I said, shifting uncomfortably against the guardhouse. "You said he didn't kill himself? I mean, he tried 3 times, barricaded his door and everything. Maybe he just finally succeeded." The first sergeant turned to me, his expression hard and unyielding. "You can't barricade doors in a mental ward," he said flatly. "You think he'd be the first to try? Besides, the last few times I talked to him, he didn't seem suicidal at all. He just really didn't want to be alone." A chill ran down my spine as my rational mind scrambled to reject what he was implying. "You're telling me a ghost held the door shut, tied the noose, and threw him out the window? What about the nurse who tried to save him?" The sergeant took a long drag of his cigarette, exhaling slowly before responding. "I'm saying there's a lot that doesn't add up. The only person who saw that nurse up close was a Dr. Chakrabarty from the next ward over. He didn't recognize her. Said she had the widest grin he'd ever seen." He flicked ash off the end of his cigarette and looked me dead in the eye. "And he sure as hell doesn't know any nurse that wears red. Obviously, killing people is wrong. If we have just one moral rule, it's that. Everything else can fall apart, and we could still have a civil society. But if we lose the value of human life, there's no right or wrong left." Claire didn't sound smug. Smugness is for people who want to flaunt how right they are. Claire spoke with the kind of quiet certainty that didn't need embellishment or fanfare. Drew, sitting across the room in Mr. Grillo's 11th grade history class, rolled his eyes so dramatically that the entire class could see. "What about war, Claire? You really think human nature can just be ignored when we fight over our differences?" She returned his look, cold and unblinking. "Obviously, there are exceptions, Drew. Killing is acceptable in certain circumstances, but only in a declared combat zone. As long as it's contained within boundaries, it's morally acceptable." She crossed her arms, her expression daring him to challenge her further. As for me, I stayed silent. I had nothing to add. "Just shut up," Martinez muttered through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible over the squelching mud beneath him. "We're doing these extra push-ups because of your dumbass." He wasn't wrong. Though I hadn't meant to get us punished as a group, that didn't make it any better. But I didn't know how to respond. "Cut it out, Martinez," Washington interjected, struggling to keep his balance as his hands slipped on the slick ground. "One team, one fight." "Shut your mouth, Washington," Brewer snapped, his movements sharp and precise despite the mud. "Nobody likes you." "Oh, come on." "God damn it, Washington. I thought even monkeys could figure things out faster than this. Every word you say makes us dumber. What will it take to shut your mouth for good?" Washington fell silent. "On your feet." Sergeant Poppy's voice cut through the tension like a whip. We obeyed, scrambling upright as quickly as the mud allowed. "You can move fast, or you can move slow. So what kinds of consequences are you willing to make the person next to you endure?" the sergeant bellowed, his voice filled with the kind of authority that dared us to stay silent. We glanced at each other, unsure if we were supposed to answer. Poppy didn't let up. "When you're supposed to have someone's back and you mess up, are you ready to wear it?" I didn't want to wear my Class A's, but duty called one last time. 4 years had passed. I was home for good, and I was trying to leave it all behind. But Dad's firm pat on my shoulder and the way Mom kept parading her friends over to meet me made it clear they weren't ready to let go just yet. If it were up to me, I wouldn't be standing here in the middle of a grand ballroom, surrounded by 100 strangers drifting aimlessly from conversation to conversation. Okay, so I'm not exactly in the middle of the room, I'm in the corner, but somehow, that just makes me stand out even more. There are over 100 people here, and I'm not sure how much longer I can take it. "Have you met Mr. and Mrs. Hopkins?" Mom's voice broke into my thoughts, her hand resting gently on my back. I straightened up quickly, but it took a full 5 minutes for my heart to slow down again. Gerald and Rosemary Hopkins were polite enough on the surface, but their questions were relentless. How long had I served? Did I know anyone who died? What did I think of politics? Every inquiry was soaked in a false sense of dignity and admiration, each one digging just a little deeper. 4 years, I answered curtly. Yes, and not much. Rosemary tilted her head, her next question landing like a needle to the chest. Do you have any scars? I didn't respond, just stared blankly. Did you get shot or injured, William? She tried again, her voice softening. No, Mrs. Hopkins, I managed to say, though my mind was far from her now. I did not. The room felt unbearably hot. I scanned for exits, 4 in total. I was near one, but I started wondering if it might be blocked. The other 3 seemed too far away. The walls closed in. My chest tightened. Well, that's excellent, dear, Rosemary said with a thin smile. Not everyone is so lucky, you know, to come home without any damage whatsoever. We were headed northwest into Tikrit, 15 vehicles strong, when it happened. Get off the Hummer and see if you can get a signal. Sergeant Poppy shouted over the roaring engine as our convoy slowed to a stop. This stretch of desert was notorious for its isolation, even with satellite phones. I jumped out, planning to cross a shallow trench and climb a small rise in the earth for a better vantage point. Poppy followed close behind. Then the sky tore itself apart. No training can prepare you for that moment. The raw, visceral reality of death breaking into your world. It's like trying to prepare for your own birth. Impossible. Death doesn't take you all at once. He's patient. He takes pieces, knowing the rest will follow in time. The second IED hit from behind, taking out another heavy assault vehicle. We were just 19 seconds into the ambush, and now down to 13 vehicles. I turned, dazed, to make sense of the chaos. That's when the force of the blast hit me. Something sharp and massive slammed into my body, hurling me violently into the trench. The noise was unbearable, pure pain, light and sound crashing together in an endless cacophony. It took me a moment to realize the noise wasn't just in my head. It was Sergeant Poppy. He was on top of me, screaming into my face. He'd thrown me into the trench, and his weight pinned me down. The trench was barely a foot deep, just enough to look over the edge at the smoldering remains of our truck. An RPG had reduced it to a heap of molten scrap. I still pray every night that those inside died instantly. I pray they didn't endure the flames, but I doubt God hears me. Their screams had gone on far too long. Down, stay down, watch your back, Poppy bellowed, his face inches from mine. It took a moment to understand him. When I finally nodded, he shifted, peering over the edge of the ditch, his M4 raised and ready. Poppy managed to get off 3 shots before they found him. His head, what was left of it, snapped backward with a sickening force before his body slumped forward, landing heavily in my lap. His skull had been torn open like a sardine can. It's strange what the mind does in moments of absolute shock. Mine took in every detail with a detached precision. Poppy's brain, gray and tangled, spilled onto my lap like some grotesque parody of SpaghettiOs. There's a distinct smell to brains, but I couldn't tell you how to describe it. It's just brain smell. His eyes stayed open, rolled back, staring blankly at me. I don't know why, but I couldn't look away. Our silent, unbroken gaze lasted far longer than it should have. I could feel something in my mind cracking, like the ice of a glacier splintering under pressure. Fissures widened, chunks broke off, and disappeared into cold, dark depths. I learned later that glaciers have to break to survive. When the stress becomes too great, parts of them simply collapse. I must have watched Poppy's foot twitch for what felt like 20 minutes. His body, heavy and lifeless, pinned me down in the trench. There was nothing I could do. Leaving the ditch would have been suicide. They had my position locked, and my M4 was back in the smoldering wreckage of our truck. A quick reaction force arrived, supported by a swarm of Blackhawks that took care of most of the enemy combatants. They pulled us out. We never made it to Tikrit. Dr. Skinner's office was exactly what I expected. There's something reassuring about degrees neatly framed on pristine white walls. They don't move, they don't change. They just exist, calm, steady, and still. The window offered a postcard-perfect view of the Gateway Arch and Busch Stadium. It was almost too picturesque, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. Dr. Skinner himself had a grandfatherly presence. His wiry frame and carefully groomed white beard gave him an air of quiet authority. His pale skin, untouched by the sun, told the story of a man who had spent his life sensibly indoors, committed to his work. "Let's talk about what it's like to be home, William," he said, his tone conversational. I smiled, giving the response I knew he wanted. "What's there to say? It's nice, calmer, it's good to decompress." The word decompress felt safe. It was a token, a sign that I was willing to talk without giving away too much. It satisfied their curiosity without setting off any alarms. Skinner's forehead furrowed, his expression thoughtful. "I can imagine it is. But tell me, did you leave any part of yourself behind when you departed Iraq?" I shifted in my chair, suddenly uncomfortable. Sure, I had memories that still made me cry, but he wasn't getting them out of me. Not today. That was one line I could still draw to keep my dignity intact. "I'm not sure what you mean by that, Dr. Skinner," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Please, William, call me Ben." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I just want to know, when you were there, what did you see?" Washington might have been the only black soldier in our squad, but it was his awkwardness that really made him stand out. I cringed as I watched him corner Private Lucina in the mess line, stumbling through another clumsy attempt at flirting. She tried to sidestep him once, twice, and then a third time, only for him to awkwardly block her again. I almost stepped in, but decided against it. Brewer didn't hesitate the same way. Washington had followed Lucina out of the mess hall. Brewer had followed Washington. I was behind them both, and that was it. No more witnesses. Before Washington even realized what was happening, Brewer had slammed him face first into the ground. Blood streamed from Washington's nose and mouth as he tried to lift his head. Brewer knelt over him, one hand pressing down hard on the back of his neck. "She doesn't fucking like you, moron. Figure it out." Washington squirmed, trying to move, but Brewer only pushed harder. "What the fuck is wrong with you? Stay the fuck away from white women." I waited for Lucina to say something. She didn't. I waited for Washington to defend himself. He didn't. He just lay there, his bloodshot eyes staring into the dirt, his body trembling. Brewer stood up, finally satisfied, and walked away. Washington stayed on the ground, blood pooling beneath him, tears streaming silently down his face. That night, no one checked on him. No one helped him as he tied the noose, kicked the chair out from under himself, and ended his life at the end of a rope. A dozen kids lined up against the wall, each jumping rope with varying success. Snap, snap, snap went the ropes in a rhythm that seemed to blend into the background. I turned, realizing Henry had been talking. He stood there smiling, clearly expecting a response to something I hadn't heard. Once, this kind of situation would have bothered me. These gaps in time, now, I barely noticed them. I smiled back. "You think so?" Henry chuckled. "Are you kidding me?" Snap, snap, snap. "This town knows who you are. I hear you're going to be in the 4th of July parade. It's an honor to have a veteran on staff. I have a feeling you'll whip these rascals into shape." He motioned to the kids over his shoulder. Snap, snap, snap. "They can be a handful." Snap, pop, snap. "Ow! What the hell is wrong with you?" A pudgy boy loomed over a smaller one, who cowered under his glare. "Why'd you hit me with your goddamn rope?" The smaller boy raised his arms feebly, trying to shield himself as the bigger boy pinned him face first to the ground. Blood dripped from the smaller kid's nose and mouth when he managed to lift his head. I waited. Surely Henry would step in. Surely the boy would defend himself. But nothing happened. So I moved. I pulled the pudgy boy off, separating him from his victim. For a moment I felt pride in my actions, a small victory in restoring peace. Then I noticed the noise. At first it sounded distant, like the buzz of an engine. Slowly it resolved into something sharper. Yelling. Henry was yelling. "Stop! Stop! What are you doing? Let him go!" I froze, confusion setting in. What was he talking about? I had stopped the fight. I looked down. The world tilted beneath me as vertigo overtook me. The pudgy boy was sprawled on the ground beneath me, barely conscious. His nose and mouth were smeared with blood. So were my hands. Attacks in the field could happen without warning. A steady hand and a trigger finger ready to act without hesitation were essential for anyone hoping to make it out alive. That night I had bent down to tie my boot. Brewers stayed tied. It changed everything. The first signs came as noise, a sharp crack that split the night, followed by white flashes. Then came the barrage. Relentless fire from 5 AK-47s positioned in 3 directions. Pop, pop, pop. I hit the ground, crawling for cover behind the wheels of a nearby Hummer. Brewer wasn't as lucky. A bullet tore through his knee, and his scream cut through the chaos. It wasn't the dignified cry of a soldier bravely facing injury. It was raw, broken, desperate. "Oh-wee! Arg!" He gurgled, clutching his shattered leg as his body convulsed. He rolled back and forth in the sand before vomiting from the pain, a frothy white stream spilling onto the ground. "Someone get my back!" he gasped, his voice choked with sobs. Then, through the haze of his agony, he locked eyes with me. "Help me, please, William," he whimpered. "It hurts so fucking much." He'd used my first name. It hit like a punch to the gut, personal, intimate, undeniable. I was 15 feet away, 20 seconds, maybe less, and I could have dragged him behind cover. But I didn't move. He stared at me, his expression shifting from hope to despair. In that silent moment, we both knew I wasn't going to help him. His sobs turned to choking gasps. Then came the sound. Whiz, splat. Sand erupted beside Brewer's head, dusting me lightly. His body stilled, his lone eye still locked on mine. I glanced up, instinct taking over. The shooter had exposed too much of himself, his torso a clear target in the moonlight. My aim zeroed in on him, and then I saw him. A kid. He couldn't have been older than 12. He turned toward me, wide-eyed and trembling, too inexperienced to realize how vulnerable he was. One shot was all it took. He didn't even have time to cry. The pudgy kid on the playground didn't cry either. His mother did, though. She was inconsolable, her screams piercing the air. I tried to comfort her. "It's okay," I said, my voice almost drowned out by her fury. "I'm sure he isn't going to die." For some reason, that only made her scream louder. "This is not okay," Henry said later, as we sat in his office. "This is going to take a lot of work to fix." I stared ahead, unseeing. I don't know what happened. How can I fix something I didn't even realize was broken? Henry sighed and closed his eyes. "You're not the one who's going to fix this, William." When he opened them again, his gaze was heavy with sadness. "What you've done goes beyond repair." The walls of the room seemed to close in, suffocating me, though I didn't understand why. "Henry, you have to give me a chance to fix this." He waved me off with a sharp flick of his head. "Not something like this. It's too extreme, too unprecedented. I've never met anyone like you." He paused, looking at me with finality. Sometimes it's best to accept that some things are too broken to fix. Something had broken in the enemy's lines. The kid lay motionless in front of me. The rest of the enemy forces stopped firing, and I could hear them retreating, like scared children. The slap on my shoulder nearly sent me into a panic. Martinez spun me around and shook me violently, and I felt the walls closing in. The pop, pop, pop from earlier echoed in my mind, and I knew I was going to die. Then he hugged me, squeezing tightly. "You did it, you fucker," he yelled. He spun me around again to face the lifeless body of the kid. I watched, transfixed, as his foot twitched. Martinez slapped me on the back. "You used to be such a pussy. I knew we could fix you." Gerald Hopkins slapped me on the back, his voice booming. "Anyway, Mayor Thurber, I appreciate you fixing this mess. I know William made a mistake with the kid at summer camp, but the 4th of July parade would really be better with him in it." I didn't look at the mayor. I stared down at my hands, fidgeting, the weight of blood on them like a shackle. I could feel the mayor's gaze on me. They trained us to know when eyes were on us. It's the only way to avoid getting hurt. I can vouch for William. I've known his father through some of the worst times, Hopkins continued, withdrawing his hand from my back. "Besides," he added, "don't we honor everyone who served, even if they make mistakes?" "Let me tell you about a mistake," I spat, the words cutting through the air. They froze. When Washington was pinned to the ground, staring at nothing, it was because he needed someone. Just one person. I could have been that person. Any of us could have, and we chose not to be there. That was a mistake. I ran out of words before I ran out of meaning. Without another word, I stood and walked out of the office. They planted Brewer's boots firmly in place. His rifle, helmet, and dog tags followed. Martinez wiped his eyes. I told myself I didn't notice. "He was more than a man," Martinez said quietly. But I knew that wasn't true. Brewer had been just a man on the inside. I'd seen him torn apart. It was a hot, cloudless day. I scanned the desolate patch of desert. "Where's Washington's stuff?" I asked, confused. Martinez shot me a glare. "Washington," he scoffed. "He did it to himself. Why would we bother with that? Just don't say anything," Dad muttered as I sat in the back seat of the 1957 Ford Mustang convertible. "Neither Mayor Thurber nor Gerald Hopkins wants anything to do with you, but everyone wants to see a soldier. Sit, wave, and for God's sake, William, don't speak your mind." It was a hot, cloudless day. The car crawled down the street, and nausea crept up in my stomach as I realized how slowly we were moving. People lined the street on both sides, hundreds of them. I hated it. Since there was no roof, everyone could see me. It felt like a terrible idea being on display like that. They trained us to know when people were watching us. It was unbearably hot. The mayor rode in a 1944 Willys MB Jeep ahead of us. The vehicle barely moved, forcing us to maintain an agonizingly slow pace. And the worst part? Every single person could see me. Every single one. The Jeep backfired ahead of us. This time I reacted instinctively, jumping out of the Hummer and running from what was left of the vehicle that had just exploded. It was engulfed in flames, making any attempt to search for survivors pointless. It's easier to tell myself that. I sprinted down the dirt road, hearing the explosion of my own Humvee behind me. Dirt rained down as I pushed forward. There was no shelter on either side of the road. It was a hot, cloudless day. "Get the fuck out of here!" someone screamed behind me. "This road's too exposed." That was the last thing he ever said. I kept running. I didn't stop until I saw an alley on my right. Without thinking, I turned into it, sprinting along the edge of a building. I dove behind a dumpster, curling up into a ball. I could hear footsteps approaching. There was nowhere to go. Then Dad appeared around the corner of the dumpster, wheezing. I couldn't read the expression on his face. It was familiar, but at the same time, foreign. The parts of his face moved, but they didn't make sense together. He was crying. Dad knelt down and lightly placed his shaking hands on my shoulders, as though afraid of me. "Why did you run away from everyone?" His voice trembled. I didn't like how his hands felt on me. "What the fuck is wrong with you, William?" I could smell the salt of his tears, and I was disgusted. I'd never seen him cry before. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the burn of the tears on my cheek. We were saved by an airstrike, because sometimes you never know who's watching from above. That night, we were at Camp Dreamland in Fallujah with the 3rd Infantry. Things were falling apart. We knew an attack was coming. I went to sleep with that knowledge. So when the screaming and gunfire woke me up, I wasn't surprised. Boom. I rolled over and reached for my M4, but only found a Beretta pistol in front of me. I grabbed it and ran. A mortar exploded behind me. I didn't want to look back. I knew it hit the spot where I'd just been sleeping. I ran faster. Someone's chasing me. A voice screamed from the darkness in front of me. I raised the Beretta and fired into the void. Then I ran toward the voice. I saw a figure dart around the corner. My heart rate spiked. Thump, thump, thump. I wasn't ready for this fight, armed with nothing but a pistol and the clothes I'd been sleeping in, but there was no choice now. I was in it. I peered around the corner, spotting a shadow moving away from me. The air was unnervingly still. I raised the Beretta again and fired. I missed. The shadow screamed and collapsed to the ground. Please, it begged. The figure raised its arms in surrender. I couldn't make sense of it. Why would an enemy combatant be surrendering here? We both knew what had to happen. Then I heard it. The sound of crying. I felt disgusted, confused. Show yourself, motherfucker! Show yourself! I spat, rage consuming me. Moonlight streamed through a nearby window. I moved around the corner, gun raised as the shadow knelt in the pale light. Give me your weapon, Please, it wept. Please don't hurt me, William. Cowering, sobbing, broken, my mother lifted her trembling hands in surrender. Inches from her head, a fresh bullet hole marred the wall of my childhood home. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that we were safe, but when I tried to lower the gun, it wouldn't budge. And that's what I saw, Dr. Skinner, I said, my voice shaking. She was afraid of me. I blinked. She still is. She always will be. Dr. Skinner furrowed his brow, scratching his snow-white beard. Do you think she should be afraid of you? My eyes burned, and I could feel my dignity slipping. I hated him for it. You're not really decompressing, are you, William? My breath became shallow. Let's talk about what you left behind in Iraq. How does it feel when people refuse to treat you like you've been broken? Is it hard to let go when everyone around you won't let you be complete in your brokenness? I didn't like being here. Didn't like the view over the city. It was too easy for someone to monitor me. Watching my back was impossible. William, you can't come home unless you show yourself to the people around you. I snapped my head toward him as he continued. Show yourself to me, William. He smiled, a wide grin that split his deeply tanned cheeks, revealing crooked yellow teeth. Thick smoke curled from the Mabara beside him, the pungent scent making my head swim. I closed my eyes. The keffiyeh wrapped around his head made it seem like his brain was being squeezed, like Play-Doh in a child's hand, oozing out of the cracks. My eyes stung. When I spoke, the voice that came from inside me was unfamiliar, distant, traitorous. Sometimes I don't know what's real. The wetness on my cheeks proved my head had finally betrayed me. My dignity couldn't hold on forever. Time would win. Sometimes I don't know if I came home.
Stories may end, but the fear remains. Subscribe to uncover more secrets hidden in the darkness. Until we meet again in the world of nightmarish shadows.